Remember when a guy lit a cigarette in a smoky cafe, the wrong woman walked back into his life, and the whole world decided that it was the most romantic thing it had ever seen? Released by Warner Brothers in 1942, Casablanca was a wartime movie that quietly became one of the most beloved films ever made. Humphrey Bogart plays Rick Blaine, a cynical American who runs a nightclub in a city packed with people that are desperate to get out. Ingrid Bergman is Ilsa, the old flame who strolls back in on the arm of resistance hero Victor Laszlo, played by Henreid. Add Claude Rains as the deliciously crooked police captain and Conrad Veidt as the icy Major Strasser, and you've got love, regret, and a whole lot of trouble colliding under one roof. And today we're going to count down 15 weird facts about Casablanca. And stick around for number one, because the scene that's broken hearts for 80 years, that was held together by fog and a fake plane. But before we get into it, do us a favor. Like, subscribe, and hype up this video. It helps YouTube show it to more classic movie fans who still know exactly what "here's looking at you, kid" really means. All right, let's get into it. After all, we'll always have Paris. Number 15. Many of the Nazis and refugees had actually lived it for real. Here's a fact that stops the countdown for a second. When you watch the crowd at Rick's, the refugees, the frightened faces, even some of the people in German uniforms, a lot of them, they weren't acting. Nearly the entire credited cast was born outside of the United States. Apart from Bogart, Dooley Wilson, and Joy Page, the people on that screen were largely European exiles, many of them Jewish, who had fled the very thing that this movie is about. Here's a few of them. S.Z. Cuddles Sakall was a warm, fussy headwaiter named Carl in the movie, and he was a Hungarian Jewish actor who actually escaped to Hollywood in 1939, and later lost family members in the camps. Marcel Dalio had been one of the biggest stars in France, the face of Renoir classics like The Rules of the Game. But then the occupation sent him fleeing for his life and left him scrounging for bit parts in Hollywood. Kurt Bois, the pickpocket who opens the film, was another German Jewish actor who'd run from the Nazis. Even Henreid, the noble resistance leader of Victor Laszlo, had been branded an enemy of the state back home. And this is why the picture's signature scene, or at least one of my favorites certainly, didn't need much directing. When the orchestra strikes up La Marseillaise, or the French national anthem, the crowd rises to drown out the German officers. And the tears on those faces, yeah, those are real. Director Michael Curtiz, himself a Hungarian Jewish emigre who'd lose relatives to Auschwitz, just let the camera run. For most of the people in the room, that scene, it wasn't a performance. It was the closest thing to fighting back that they had. Number 14. This classic movie started in the reject pile. One of the all-time greats started as a play that nobody wanted to put on. Everybody Comes to Rick's, written in 1940 by Murray Burnett and Joan Allison, got shopped around Broadway and really went absolutely nowhere. It just sat there, unproduced and gathering dust. The spark came from a trip that Burnett took through Europe in 1938. Along the way, he stopped at a club in the south of France and found the whole thing in miniature, a mixed crowd of locals, officers, and people on the run, all of it floating on the music of a black piano player holding the room together. That club came right down to its name, Café Américain. It became Rick's, and the cynical owner running the place became Rick Blaine. Back in New York, Burnett and Allison turned it into a play, but Broadway said, no thanks. The thing might have stayed on a shelf forever if a Warner Brothers story editor named Irene Diamond hadn't finished it out and pushed it straight to producer Hal Wallis. Other studios had already passed, but Warner's, they saw a movie. Early in 1942, with the country freshly at war, the studio bought the unproduced play for $20,000, the most that Warner Brothers had ever spent on a script that had never seen a stage. They slapped a new title on it, Casablanca, hoping to ride the glow of the 1938 hit Algiers. They handed the dialogue to a room full of writers, and it turned somebody's unwanted manuscript into a Best Picture winner. The reject pile, it turns out, occasionally, it can cough up an all-timer. Number 13. Ronald Reagan was almost Rick Blaine. Now here's a casting rumor that haunted movie buffs for 80 years. Before Bogart, the studio told the whole country that Casablanca would star Ronald Reagan. On January 5th, 1942, Warner Brothers planted an item in the Hollywood Reporter saying that Reagan, Ann Sheridan, and Dennis Morgan would star in its new romance. Newspapers picked it up and ran it nationwide. Fans have been clutching their pearls ever since. Now, this was just complete hot air. It was the studio publicity machine doing what it always does, floating contract players' names out there to keep them in the headlines. So Reagan and Sheridan had King's Row about to hit theaters, and a splashy "our next big picture" announcement was just free advertising. Nobody had actually been cast. The names were just bait. The release didn't even say which part Reagan would play. Behind the curtain, producer Hal Wallis only ever wanted one man for Rick, and his own memos prove it: Bogart from day one. Reagan wasn't the runner-up. He wasn't even in the race. The studio already knew that he was army-bound. a reserve officer running out of deferments. He headed for active duty before this thing ever started shooting. Which is just as well, because Rick needed a guy who looked like life had let him down at least twice. Bogart wore that like an old coat. Reagan, he was sunshine in a suit. He was charming, right? But that's kind of the wrong address entirely. If you put that gravel and heartache stare on Mr. Wholesome, the whole movie's going to tilt sideways. Number 12, the iconic song was almost cut until a haircut saved it. As Time Goes By is so fused to Casablanca that most people just assume it was written for the movie. The man scoring the movie wished that it had never come near it. Composer Max Steiner couldn't stand the song, partly, it seems, because it wasn't his, and a song of his own would have meant royalties. Herman Hupfeld had written it back in 1931 for a Broadway revue called Everybody's Welcome. It was baked into the original play, and it got filmed long before Steiner ever showed up. His pitch was blunt. Let's rip the whole thing out and let him write an original love theme instead. And he nearly got his way, until the calendar and a pair of scissors stopped him. As the story goes, killing the song meant reshooting the scenes around it. The Paris flashbacks, the cafe moments, and then Ingrid Bergman had already moved on to For Whom the Bell Tolls, and she cropped her hair into a short pixie cut for the role. No wig was going to fake Ilsa's look convincingly. So the official verdict was the reshoots were impossible. The song stays, thankfully. So Steiner swallowed it and did the exact thing that he fought against. He threaded As Time Goes By all through his score and made it the heartbeat of the whole movie. The tune that he wanted gone became one of the most cherished melodies in movie history, all because Ingrid Bergman got a haircut. Number 11, nobody ever actually says, "Play it again, Sam." Quote Casablanca at a party, and there's a great chance that you're probably going to get it wrong, because everyone remembers this line, but nobody actually ever says it in the movie. Play it again, Sam never happens. Not even once. But it's still stuck. Hard. Here's what's actually said on screen. When Ilsa walks into Rick's Café Américain, she leans on Sam to play As Time Goes By, starting soft. Play it once, Sam, for old time's sake. How's my Ingrid Bergman? Not great, right? But that's okay. Then she pushes when he plays dumb. Play it, Sam. Play As Time Goes By. Later, a drunk and gutted Rick storms up to the same piano and growls, "You played it for her, you can play it for me." Then, daring himself through it, "If she can stand it, I can. Play it." So the famous quote isn't really a quote at all. It's two separate scenes and two beautiful, heartbroken people, mashed into one tidy phrase that fit on a poster better than the real thing ever could. It fits so well that it became the title of a 1969 Broadway play and the 1972 movie that Woody Allen wrote and starred in, cementing a line that was never in the script that it's credited to. Decades later, the misquote, it's still winning. It outlived the cast, it outlived the writers, and it outlived everyone who ever pulled up a stool at Rick's. Number 10. Dooley Wilson couldn't play a single note of piano. The man behind that unforgettable piano moment, well, he had one tiny gap on his resume. He couldn't play piano at all. Dooley Wilson was a working musician. He's a drummer, though, not a pianist. He spent the 20s touring Europe as a singing drummer with the Red Devils, playing clubs in London and Paris. Put him behind a kit, and he's golden, but put him behind a keyboard, and he's a very stylish man, pressing keys at random. So when Sam had to play As Time Goes By, the studio went full old Hollywood sleight of hand. They parked pianist Elliot Carpenter just off camera, right in Wilson's sightline. And Wilson watched his hands and mirrored every move. Fingering, timing, the little arm flourishes, all of it. A musical version of lip syncing. Carpenter wasn't some random hire either. The Red Devils had actually been his band. Wilson was his old drummer from the European days. And the two stayed close for the rest of Wilson's life. The fake-out held so well that nobody ever watching ever caught his hands drifting off the music. Not bad for a drummer selling the most convincing piano performance he ever played. Number 9. The censors secretly wrote that ending. One of the great gut punch endings in movie history was, in part, handed to the writers by the censors. In 1942, every studio answered to the production code, the Hays Code, and the code had ironclad rules about romance. A married woman could not run off with another man and ride into the sunset, which is a bit awkward given that Casablanca is written about a married woman doing everything but that. But here's the tangle that the writers had to untie. In the original play, she wasn't Ilsa at all. She was Lois Meredith, a brash American and Rick's old flame. Amoral enough that the play had her sleeping with him to get her hands on the letters of transit. None of that was surviving Code-era Hollywood. So they rebuilt her, noble, sympathetic, and married to Laszlo. That cleaned her up a bit, and immediately created a new problem, because now her Paris romance with Rick was flat-out adultery. The fix was one clean detail. When she fell for Rick, she believed that Laszlo was dead. No knowing betrayal, no adultery, censors were satisfied. The writer's real trick was who made the call. Instead of Ilsa choosing, they handed the decision to Rick. He uses the letters of transit, he sends her away for the greater good, and swallows his own happiness to do it. The censors got the ending they wanted, and the audience got their hearts ripped out in a scene that still plays as one of the most romantic ever filmed. Number 8, the movie's coldest Nazi actually hated Nazis in real life. The guy who gives you chills as Major Strasser, Casablanca's coldest Nazi, despised the real thing as much as anyone alive. Conrad Veidt left Germany with his Jewish wife and spent his final years making sure that no audience ever felt a flicker of sympathy for the people he played. Back home, Veidt had been one of the biggest, best-paid stars of German silent cinema. That ended in 1933, when a new regime started purging the film industry. Goebbels' ministry made everyone in the business fill out a racial questionnaire declaring their ancestry. Veidt, who wasn't Jewish but had just married Ilona Prager, who was, looked at the race box and wrote Jude, or Jew. He knew exactly what that cost. It made him unemployable in Germany overnight. His line on it was that nothing in the world would make him turn his back on his wife. So he got out, landing first in Britain and eventually then in Hollywood, where he leaned straight into playing the very people he'd run from. His rule was simple. If he played a Nazi, that Nazi was pure menace. No charm, no soft edges. Nobody in the theater would root for him by accident. And here's the kicker. This anti-Nazi exile was the highest paid actor on the entire Casablanca cast. He backed his convictions with his wallet, too. Veidt poured a big share of his film salaries and much of his personal fortune into the British war effort. On screen, he made fascism terrifying, and off of it, he spent his own money trying to end it. And Casablanca, fittingly, was the last film of his to reach theaters before he died the following year. Hey, quick pause. If you're enjoying this, tap that like button. It tells YouTube to send more movie deep dives like this to people like you. And make sure that you send this to all your friends who swear that this is the greatest movie of all time. All right, let's get back to the countdown. Number 7, Hollywood's greatest lovers barely spoke off camera. Rick and Ilsa ached for each other like few couples in movie history. The actors playing them could barely make small talk. Ingrid Bergman summed up working with Humphrey Bogart in one devastating line. She kissed him, but she never knew him. So weeks of filming that swooned over romance, and off camera, the warmth just wasn't there. Bogart stayed behind a wall. Polite, distant, a bit hard to read. A lot of it traced back to what he was dealing with at home. His marriage to his third wife, Meo Methot, was a famously combustible, booze-soaked war. The papers called them the Battling Bogarts, and she was convinced that he was carrying on with Bergman. So whenever he wasn't needed on set, Bogart parked himself in his dressing room and stayed out of the line of fire. They'd find the occasional way to kill the dead time between setups, but it never thawed into anything close to a real friendship. Every flicker of longing on screen got built, take by take, out of pure craft. Which means the most romantic pairing in film history was just essentially two co-workers, a great director, and a mountain of self-control. Turns out you don't have to actually know someone to make the whole world believe that you're in love with them. Number 6, Bogart needed a box to kiss his co-star. Now on screen, Rick Blaine looms over everybody. But in real life, Humphrey Bogart had to look up to his leading lady. Ingrid Bergman had about 2 inches on him. She's roughly 5'9" to his generous 5'8". And here's the thing. Bogart wasn't really that short. 5'8's about average for a man back then. Bergman was just pretty tall, which by the rules of 1940s romance, apparently is a crisis. So the crew quietly propped him up. In the 2 close shots, Bogart stood on a wooden box kept just out of frame. For scenes where he actually had to move, he wore elevator shoes with lifts built into the soles, buying back a couple of inches without anybody noticing. And when Rick and Ilsa sat together, Bogart would get a big cushion to bring his shoulders up over hers. Add in a director who knew exactly where to put the camera, and the math, well, you couldn't tell it was there. It disappeared. The audience never clocked any of it. Rick stayed the towering, world-weary tough guy that he was supposed to be, held up in the most literal sense by a box, a cushion, and a very good pair of shoes. Number 5, Casablanca accidentally became wartime propaganda. Casablanca was never built to be a piece of war messaging. It just had absurdly, almost suspiciously good timing. Warner Brothers shot the whole thing in 1942 with no idea that real events were about to do their advertising for them. The script was done, the cameras were wrapped, and then the headlines caught up. That November, Allied forces launched Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa. And one of the targets was a city that most Americans had never even heard of or given a second thought, Casablanca, somewhere in Morocco. Overnight, the name was splashed across every front page in the country. The studio didn't need to be told twice. The movie had been penciled in for spring of 1943, but Warner's yanked it forward and rushed it into a New York premiere on November 26th, just weeks after the invasion kicked off. And then the coincidence got greedy. The film went into wide release on January 23rd, 1943. And the very next day, the public learned that Roosevelt and Churchill had just spent 10 days secretly holed up at a war summit in, of all places, Casablanca. The Casablanca Conference, same name as the movie that had opened nationwide 24 hours earlier. That's a part that nobody could have engineered. The meeting was classified. The studio shouldn't have had any clue that it was happening. The news broke one day after the film hit theaters across the country, dumping a mountain of free publicity on the movie that already shared the headline. So a romantic drama ended up wearing the most talked about place name on Earth that month. The government had been nudging Hollywood to make pictures that lifted spirits, and audiences were primed for it. But the reason that Casablanca hit hard, well, that was simpler. It was a story about people forced to put something bigger ahead of their own happiness, playing to a room full of people being asked to do exactly that. They came for a love story, and they left having watched their own lives with better lighting. Number 4, the most famous line was made up at a poker table. A line that a lot of people quote from the movie, Bogart reportedly made up himself, and the script had something far blander in its place. As written, Rick's toast was, "Here's good luck to you, kid." Forgettable, I guess. What came out of Bogart's mouth was, "Here's looking at you, kid." And movie history quietly rerouted itself. The phrase wasn't his invention. "Here's looking at you" had been a barroom toast since the 1800s. The Bogart part was where it came from on set. Between takes, he had been teaching Ingrid Bergman to play poker to help her relax, tossing the lines out over the cards, and by the time that they shot the Paris flashback, it was already second nature to him. So he just used it. Weary, fond, a little guarded, which happened to be Rick Blaine in just a couple of words. And it stuck. The line got kept and then deliberately worked back into the script. 4 times in all, until a piece of throwaway card table banter was carrying the whole weight of Rick and Ilsa's romance. Not bad for something a guy just muttered while dealing a hand. Number 3, the anthem showdown almost died over copyright. One of the film's most rousing moments almost got tripped up by something far less dramatic than the war: paperwork, specifically copyright. The officers were originally supposed to belt out the actual Nazi Party anthem. The catch was that a German publisher still had rights to it abroad, which meant that Warner Brothers could have been on the hook for royalties, or worse, a lawsuit in neutral countries where that publisher could still come after them. So the studio went looking for a song that nobody owned. The answer was wonderfully unglamorous: Die Wacht am Rhein, a creaky old 19th century German patriotic tune that had long since fallen into the public domain. It was free to use, no rights holder, no risk. The menace stayed exactly the same. Only the melody changed. And it was purely a money and lawyers' call, not a nerve thing. Warner Brothers never once tried to soften the villains. The movie names them, mocks them, and buries them from the first reel to the last. The officers still stand up and sing, they just sing something that the studio didn't have to pay for. The audience never noticed, but the lawyers, they certainly did. Number 2, even the cast didn't know how the story would end. Casablanca plays like every beat was planned to the second, but it wasn't. For a lot of the shoot, nobody knew where the thing was going. The script was getting written as the cameras rolled. Pages would land the night before they were due on set. Scenes were getting torn up and redone on the fly. Ingrid Bergman spent the whole production quietly losing her mind over one question: which man does Ilsa actually love? She kept asking, and the answer that she would get back was basically a shrug. Play it somewhere in the middle. We'll figure it out. So she performed all that longing and heartbreak with no idea who she'd be walking away with. The screenplay was passed around like a hot potato. The Epstein twins, Howard Koch, and uncredited Casey Robinson all took swings at it. Tempers ran hot right to the end. Bogart and Curtiz got into it so badly over how he should play the final scene that producer Wallis had to step in and break it up. And the movie's last line, it wasn't even locked in until after shooting wrapped. Now, the ending itself was locked from the start. The code saw to that. But what stayed up in the air was everything around it. How the goodbye played, what became of Rick. Bergman just didn't have that certainty in the moment. And the not knowing leaked straight into her performance. Every hesitant glance is real. The chaos, it didn't sink the movie, it quietly made it. And number 1, that heartbreaking airport goodbye, it's totally fake. That foggy, heartbreaking goodbye on the tarmac, the scene that the whole movie is really remembered for, happened on a soundstage barely big enough to swing a camera. The production couldn't get a real airport. Wartime security rules kept film crews off airfields, especially after dark. And the soundstage Warner Brothers did have couldn't fit a full-size plane. So if they couldn't bring a real aircraft to the scene, they'd have to fake one convincingly enough that 80 years of audiences would never question it. They started by shrinking the problem. The plane standing behind Rick and Ilsa was a scaled-down model, half and quarter size, built of plywood, balsa, and cardboard, depending on who's telling it, dressed up to pass for a real Lockheed. Then they sold it with people. As the story goes, the crew hired short-statured actors and put them in mechanics' overalls and had them work around the model. Next to smaller people, a small plane reads as a full-size one sitting way off in the distance. Then crank the fog machines, drop the lights, and the haze, it handles the rest, burying the model's missing detail and smudging the background until nobody thinks to look twice. And there you have it, everyone. 15 weird and wild facts about Casablanca. Which fact surprised you the most? Well, drop it in the comments and share this with a friend who still tears up at the airport. And until next time, here's looking at you, kid. This is Remember When.